We are starting. Good evening. We're on the top of Lam. We're actually on Daf Lamed Aleph. Lamed Aleph, two-thirds of the way down at a new Mishnah. Um, and Amir Hashem, I'd like to get to almost halfway down on Lamed Beis and Mid Beis. Just we really do need to push so that we can catch up. Dangerous to fall behind in a difficult Masechta. So let's get started with this new Mishnah, almost two-thirds of the way down on Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph, excuse me, and we'll be discussing if a person does shchita shelo bekavana. Says the Mishnah, nafla sakin v'shachta. Let's say I'm sitting at the table. I made ribeye, and there's a knife on the table. I dropped a knife. There's a chicken on the floor. Perfect shchita. Says the Gemara, afal pi sheshachta kedarka. Even though the shechita was perfect, you look at it, you can analyze it. The feathers are cut from the outside. There was no chalada, no ikor, perfect cut. The knife had no nicks, perfect. Says the Gemara, even though it was done great, the halacha is psula. Shneimar v'zavachta v'achal tamasha tazovecha tauchel. That which you shecht, not that which gets shechted. That which you shecht, not you as opposed to another person, but you as opposed to a nobody. So we're talking about neutrality in regards to kavanah. The knife fell off the table, fell perfectly. Says the Gemara, no dice. The Gemara opens time of the nafla. The reason why this is a wonderful diuk from the Mishnah, it seems to be, says the Gemara, because it fell. Ha hi pilahu. But what if I knocked it off the table? So there we have some motion that was caused by me on purpose. I threw it down. Therefore, kshera v'afal gav lo mechavet. So that's the Gemara's starting point, is that we could make a diak from our Mishnah that as long as there was some element of kavana, even if the kavana wasn't to shecht, but seemingly the kavana was just to make the knife fall on the floor. I pushed it off the table and it shechted a bird perfectly, or whatever, any other animal. The halacha is that it's kshera v'afal gav lo mechavet. So that seems to imply that all we need is kavana to make the knife move, not kavana to shecht, just kavana to make the knife move. Mantana de lo ba'inan kavana lishchita. Who's the shita in the Tanaim who says that we are allowed to do shchita shalo bekavana? So says the Gemara, Marava Reb Nasan, he the Tani Oshaya Zeir min Chevraya, Oshaya Zeira from Chevraya taught the following brisa: Zorak sakin lenoatza bekosel. I take a knife. I went axe throwing. Perfect example. I went axe throwing. Have you ever seen that clip of this guy, this pitcher, this Major League Baseball pitcher who pitched a ball at like 90 miles an hour and punk it hit a bird and you see this? So just imagine he.
Much faster than 90.
Oh, I have no idea. I'm not holding cup. I was approximating.
That's the
So
thing he's most famous for.
probably the only reason you know him. Yeah.
The whole thing was
So the Gemara says that had you gone axe throwing and you hit that bird, so the halcha v'shachta gedaka Reb Nasan machshir. This is exactly what we were looking for. Amar makom in the Tanaim to support the diuk of our Mishnah. So therefore, the author of our Mishnah is likely someone like Reb Nasan, who is machshir if you have no kavanah chacham and poslim, and who tani lavu who amar la halacha kereb Nasan, and he paskins this way as well. Says the Gemara, I understand. Our Mishnah was clear. If nafla, then not good. If he pila, if you made it fall, then it's good, and we hold like Reb Nasan. The problem is, Rava already taught this, and if you were looking carefully, you'd see on the fourth line of the Gemara that Rava was the one who answered this case too. Rava already taught us that Reb Nasan was the one who held this way. Where do we see this? Ditzanan, we have a Mishnah earlier in the Masechta. The Chullin sheshachtu ve'acherim ra'anasan. If you have a cher shot of a katan, and there's someone else who can see them shechting shchitas and kshera. I mean, in mantana de lo by kavana l'shchita. Who is the one that we said on Daf Yud Beis? Who's the one who says that kavana can be done that shchita can be done shelo b'kavana? So why does Rava have to say the same exact thing twice? He taught us on Daf Yud Beis. He taught us on Daf Yud Beis that shchita can be done shelo b'kavana, and he teaches us over here Daf Lamed Aleph it can be done shelo b'kavana. We're 10 lines from the bottom of Lamed Aleph and Aleph, says the Gemara. Why does Rava repeat himself tzricha? We actually need to have two Mari Makomos of Rava to teach us that we hold like Rav Nasan that shchita shelo b'kavana is kosher. Because the Yashmuinan by the case from Daf Yud Beis of Cher Shot of Akasan Hasam Mishum de Kamechav and the Shum Chaticha Ba'olam. While it's true that a Cher Shot of Akatan may not have das, this is a bit of a presumption. It's a jump. It doesn't sound pasha to me, but at least they know they're cutting something. I'm not sure that's true. I have children who are very young. I mean, not this young anymore, but if I had a 2-year-old who threw a knife, he didn't know he was cutting anything. As far as he's concerned, he was throwing a toy. He had no idea. You have a shota mehechatesi that he. So the Gemara presumes that perhaps even though he didn't know he was doing shechita, at least they know that knives can cut. Aval hacha in our Mishnah de lo kamechav, and clearly in our Mishnah they had no kavan at all. And the Yashmin and hacha, if we only had our case, mishum de kaasi mikoach ben das. At least by our Mishnah, when I was hipila, when I pushed it off the table, but I'm a bar das, I'm not a chershot of a katan. Aval hasim by the case of chershot of a katan de lo kaasi mikoach das, mikoach ben das emalo tzricha. We needed them because the case of chershot of a katan has chidushim that our Mishnah doesn't have. Our Mishnah has chidushim that the chershot of a katan don't have, and we're afraid that we would have had a misunderstanding. Kamash malan that we hold that shchita can be done shelo bekavana, and it's totally mutter according to Reb Nassim. Itmar nida shene'en sa v'tavla, a woman who was a nida, and ne'en sa v'tavla. This is not ne'en sa in the way that we typically translate it as though she was violated. Right, exactly. Nen Savatavla. She accidentally was tovelas. She went swimming in an ocean, whatever the case is. That Shuvas Rav Moshe like this, that how can it be that everyone in secular Jewish America, they're all B'nai Nida, all the babies that were born now. So Rav Moshe has the Tshuva Limut that perhaps they went to the ocean, perhaps they went to some type of swimming pool, that there was no Mayim. I don't know, it's difficult. Shver. Yeah. Well, chatzitza is only a problem midoraisa if it's ruba umakbid. If you're covered 51% and you wish it wasn't there, so nail polish doesn't count midoraisa. The eyelashes that are glued on don't count midoraisa.
Holding off a bridge fully dressed.
Yeah, but the clothes are not really problematic as long as they're moisture absorbent. Because son is called a rayla bila and bila ma'akebes, but those types of svaras that as long as water could get there. It's actually not hard to be yotze the mikvah midoraisa if you're in an ocean. It's really not so difficult, but your timing has to be perfect. And what about bedikas? What did my brother tell me today? He told me about a woman whose first name was like I can't remember, but something in that space of like, her first name was. He met a woman whose first name was Kesem. Geschmack first name. So I asked if her middle name was Bedika. Yeah, it's a Givaldic first name. It's not like the Rif, it's not like the Rambam. The Sfardim don't hold of Ksamim. So obviously the person must have been Ashkenaz. So Itmar Nida Shinen Savatavla, she ended up going into a mikvah of some kind. I'm Rabbi Yehuda Marav to Hora Lebesa. She's allowed to be with her husband, but the Asura Le'echol B'Truma. What a difficult bifurcation. She jumps into the mikvah by accident, and all of a sudden she's allowed to be intimate, but she's not allowed to eat truma. Rav Yochanan Amar Afla Beisa Lotar. Wow, what a weird distinction. No, you're not kosher for anything, nothing. You can't be with him and you can't eat truma. Amar Le Rav Rav Nachman. Li Rav the Amar Tahor Le Beisa V'Asur Le'echol B'Truma. I don't understand Bechlal your shita. If you say she's allowed to sleep with her husband, but she's not allowed to eat truma, Avon Kares Hutra, sleeping with it. You're going to allow, if you're concerned enough that she's in nida, that you're going to say she can't eat truma. So, safek kares, you're going to allow them to sleep together. But iser misa miboya, like you've got it backwards. The more chamor case is the case of them being intimate. So, how in the world can you split it in this way to say, Rav, that if she was nensa v'tavla, that they can be together intimately, but she can't eat truma? It's such a weird and backwards distinction. When it comes to the bailim, there's no kachim involved. Yes, you're right, 100%. There's an element of safek kares. I agree, but it's not kachim. It's such a subtle and complex distinction. We're more worried about kachim versus chullin than we are about kares versus misa. Very difficult. The chullin lo by kavan. How do we know that chullin doesn't require kavana? Ditnan. Gal, let's say that you're sitting by the beach. Gal shenitlash, there's a wave that separates itself from the ocean. Uvo arbaim sa. And the wave that separated was itself 40 sa. V'nafal al ha'adam ala kelim tohorim. Ah, beautiful. So we see, therefore, that we have a case of tahara shelo bekavan. We see that it works. My love, adam dumya de kalim. Maybe we should say that a person is like kalim. Ma kalim de lo michavne. Just like kalim can't have kavana. If adam nami lo by kavana. The guy's lying on the beach sleeping. He had no idea what was going to happen. He got hit with a 40 saw wave, which probably hurts. What's the halacha? Tahor. Says the Gemara Mimai. Why are you reading it that way? Dilma, perhaps beyoshivu mitzape oskinan. Emasayit lashagal. Maybe the guy knew he was tamei, And he said, I'm going to go to the beach today. I don't like going in cold water, but if in fact there's going to be a wave that will separate from the ocean, at least it'll be matayr me. I'll be cold. I'll get over it. So how do you know that it was that way? As we turn to the top of Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, and maybe perhaps as far as V'Kalim, Dumya de Adam, maybe it's the exact opposite. Maybe we don't compare Adam to Kalim. Maybe we compare Kalim to Adam, Ma Adam, and I'm going to change the girsa based on Rashi de bar kavana. Just like a person can have kavana of Kalim Nami to come Adam. You need a person behind the Kalim to say, I want them to become Tahor. So we tried and it didn't work. And if you want to say that, of course, a person has to have kavana, if that's true, why did you answer b'yoshevu mitzape? Because we had to offset a concern. What's the concern? 3 lines down. Maybe we should say that you would not become tamei, you would not become tahor, excuse me, with a gal, with a wave that separated gal shenit lash, because I might have thought that a chardlis shel geshamim, that if you have this water flooding down a mountain, which is not the same as a wave, I might have been gozer to not allow the wave to be matayr because of chardla shel gshamim. Inami ligzar Russian atu kipin, or I might have said that only the tips of the waves are good enough, but not the kipin, not the dome part of the wave. Only the end of the wave is okay, not the actual curve. Very subtle distinctions. Who's watching that carefully? But that's what the Gemara said. That we do allow for that wave, to the Russian of the wave, the tips of the wave, to be mataher a person, even if it wasn't his intention, provided that he was paying attention. And how do we know this distinction that we just said, that Russian are allowed but keepin are not, when it comes to a wave that we've literally split a wave in half, where the tips of the wave can be mataher you, but the dome part, the curved part cannot, says the Gemara. That's not, we have a Mishnah. It's really Detanya, it's a Bryce and Chagiga. Matbilin Russian, you are allowed to be tovel in the Russian, in the tips of the waves. Ve'ein matbilin b'kipin, she'ein matbilin ba'avir. You're not allowed to, that would be like being tovel in the air. A little bit of an interesting svara. We're not going to spend time on this now, but anyways, that's what the Gemara was concerned about. So answer number 1, tried and failed. So we're back to our question. Remember, we started off by saying Gal Shanit Lash was the example. The Gemara says no. No, the person was takamachavin during that time. So therefore, that's not a case of shalom bekavana. So let's try again. Answer number 2, 10 lines down on Lamed Aleph. That's not. Let's say that you have fruits that fell into an amasamayim, into an aqueduct, into some raw water reservoir. And let's say my hands are tameh, and I stick them in the running water to grab the fruits. What happens to my hands? Yod of tahoros. My hands are tahor. Shelo bekavana. I wasn't intending on doing anything. I was just reaching in to get the fruits. Upeiros einan b'chiyutan. And the fruits are not mukhshar latuma, because we have a rule that the only time that fruits are mukhshar latuma b'chiyutan is when I wanted them to become wet. But it says over here that peiros shenaflu. So therefore, my hands are tahor, and the peiros are not able to contract or give tuma to others. Now, let's say that my hands are tahor, and I also wanted to be metaher them, then yod of tahoros, and upeiros b'chiyutan. If I wanted it to be that I wanted the fruits to get wet, excuse me, not to clean my hands. If I wanted it to be that the fruits should get wet, then those are also good. So this is our answer. This is our answer to our question that uminat timra, that how do we know that something shalom b'kavana can be mitar? Because we said the guy's hands were tameh, he wasn't thinking about it. The fruits fell into the aqueduct, he stuck his hands and pulled out the fruits. His hands become tahor right away. That was shalom b'kavana. So the Gemara is going to ask a couple of questions on this. Eisvei, hold on one second. Eisvei Rava le Rav Nachman. Rava says to Rav Nachman, Tova l'chulin v'hochzak l'chulin. A person went to the mikvah for chulin, and he had kavana for chulin. So says the Gemara, Asr l'maiser. That's not sufficient to do meiser. Meiser has a kachim-esque component to it. Masha ein ken chulin. Hochzak in lo, hochzak lo. So that implies that with kavana, yes, and without kavana, no. So that's a kasha and a meiser. We just brought an answer from Peirosh and Raful Soch Amas Hamayim, that was an answer that Tefillah Shelo b'Kavana counts. What do we see over here? That it doesn't count. We see that only Hochzak in lo, hochzak lo. Says the Gemara, you misunderstood. Says the Gemara, Hachi Kamar Afal Pi Hochzak l'Chulin Asr l'Meiser. Even though it was Hochzak for Chulin, it's Asr l'Meiser. So that is no longer a question. It'll still be usher when it comes to Meiser. Esvei, question number two, Taval v'lo huchzak. Let's say that I was Tovel, but I had no kavana. Then it's Ki'ilu lo Taval. My lav Ki'ilu lo Taval klal. Seemingly you didn't do anything. No, lo. Ki'ilu lo Taval l'meiser. Taval l'chulin. It does work for that. So then all of this really bothered Rava because Rava felt that he was just being brushed away by Rav Nachman. So who's savar dichui koman chile? He felt that he was getting brushed away by his Rebbe. This is Rava, 4th century Amora, being brushed away by Rav Nachman, a 3rd century his Rebbe, or certainly from the Rebbe generation. So the Gemara says, what did Rava do? He didn't get upset and go complain to the Rebbe. He picked up a sefer and tried to find out what the Rebbe meant. Says the Gemara, Nafak dak v'ashkach. He went out and he went looking, and then he found the Brisa. Did Tanya what? No, I don't believe so. No. Sorry, where did you think I skipped? Just to make sure.
Low.
Lo ki'ilu lo taval l'meiser. Maybe I did. My love ki'ilu lo taval klal. Lo ki'ilu lo taval l'meiser. Aval taval l'chulin. So the Gemara over here says that you might have thought that there was no tefillah at all for meiser kamash, but not that way. That really he was taval l'chulin. And Rava complained about the fact that his Rebbe was pushing him away. So he did some research. We see this idea is now verified, and Rava shouldn't be concerned that Rav Nachman was trying to brush him away. It's taka the case that if you were taval without kavana, it's mutter l'chulin and asr l'maiser. So therefore, we see a proper answer. We wanted to know where could we find a marim makom that tefillah shula b'kavana would count. The Gemara answers over here where you're taval v'lo huchzak. Look what the halacha is. I was taval without kavana. What's the din? Mutter l'chulin. Good to go. So we have our answer. Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef. This marim makom that we just said, Abaye was a Talmud of Rav Yosef, also 4th century Abaye, 3rd century Rav Yosef. So says the Gemara, Lema tavatuf to Rav Yochanan meha. Maybe what we see over here is a rejection of the shita of Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan held on the previous page that she's not mutter to her husband. She's not mutter to anything. Maybe we should say over here that she should have been, because Taval v'lo huchzak should have worked. Taval v'lo huchzak, we said was mutter l'chulin. So why would Rav Yochanan on the bottom of the page say that he was not mutter l'beisa? He should have been mutter l'beisa based on this. Amar the Rav Yochanan, because Rav Yochanan has another shita in the Tanaim that they hold like. Dad, you have a question? Dad, no? Amar le Rav Yochanan, who da Amar like Rav Yonasan ben Yosef. That really Rav Yochanan holds like Rav Yonasan ben Yosef. The Tanya Rav Yonasan ben Yosef, Omer, we're halfway down on Lamed Aleph and Beis. The pasuk says in Vayikra v'chubas matam lomar shenis. If you look at the pasuk, it actually says the language of kvisa twice. It says techabes, and then it says v'chubas shenis. So says the Gemara, matam lomar shenis. The Gemara says, Makish tichboses shnia l'tichboses rishona. The second cleaning and the first cleaning are similar. Ma tichboses rishona l'das, it has to be done with kavana. So too tichboses shnia has to be done with kavana. And says the Gemara, Ima lahalan be'inan das koin, that in the tichboses rishona, when we're dealing with this particular kind of tumah, we need a kohen. I might have thought that Afkan with the tichboses shnia bo'inan das koin, tamalomar v'taher mikol makom, that it becomes tahor even without a kohen, provided that you have some degree of kavana. And that is why Rav Yochanan doesn't agree with his counterpart. So Rav Yochanan was the sheet at the bottom of Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph, who was of the opinion that this woman who fell into the mikvah, Nen Savatavla, so Rav Yochanan said, Afla Beisa Lo Tara. Why is she not Tahora? We just brought a beautiful Mari Makom. The second source that we brought was a good Mari Makom, that even if you're Taval Velo Huchzak, that it still works. So he says, because I don't hold that way. He said, I hold like Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef. Yeah, Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef, who says that Mikol Makom, even though there's no Kohen, but you do need to have a minimum of Kavana. Says the Gemara, 2/3 of the way down, just about 2/3 of the way down, Maskeflor of Simi Barashi, Umi Amar Rav Yochanan Hachi. Does Rav Yochanan really hold that way? But Amar Rav Yochanan Halacha Kistam Mishnah. Rav Yochanan always holds that the halacha follows a Mishnah that was written anonymously. If it's not, we have a Mishnah that doesn't seem to say like the Rabbi Yochanan that we just saw. We just painted Rabbi Yochanan like Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef, that you need kavanah, and then perhaps it would work. But what does the Mishnah say? Nafla sakinu shachata, afapisha shachta kedar kapsula, vavinan bataima de nafla. Why did the Mishnah say that the shechita was invalid? Because it was nafal. Hahipila hukshera. So we see black on white that not like him. That's how our Gemara opened. Rav Yochanan seems to be so ser, our basic diuk of our Gemara, that our whole day of learning has been predicated upon at the open of the Mishnah Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph. So the Gemara says that this is a big problem. Remember that we learned about Rav Nassan already, but the basic gist over here is that we seem to be in a scenario where you don't need kavana to do the shechita, you just need kavana to make sure that it falls, right? That it has to be hipila. So it says the Gemara, b'shchita, when we're talking about shchita, afilu Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef, we should add the word modi, that even Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef, who was Rabbi Yochanan's backdrop, he was Rabbi Yochanan's Tana, he supported Rabbi Yochanan's Shita. I guess Rabbi Yochanan leaned on Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef Shita. He would even agree by Shchita. Why? Midegali Rachmana Misasek Bekachim Pasal, because we know that when it comes to Kachim, if one is Misasek, they're kind of mitzvos hanashim elamada, they're going about their way, they're not really paying attention. So because they're misasik bekachim their puzzle, what does that imply? Mechlal the Chullin lo ba'inon kavana. So everyone agrees that when it comes to misasik by kachim it's puzzle. That would imply that when it comes to Chullin, that lo ba'inon kavana. So everyone does seem to agree. I v'Rabbanan, the rabbis who argue with Reb Nassan holds that you don't need kavana. So what about the Rabbanan who disagree? This is a very important distinction. I agree that you don't need kavana to perform shchita. However, lechaticha ba'inan, you at least have to have a minimum kavana to do cutting. You don't have to have a kavana for shchita. So Reb Nassan holds that even if you don't have kavana for shchita, you just have to knock the knife off the table. As long as there's some kind of koach rishon of you, so then the din would be this way, that the shchita would be kosher. Masha Enkin, the Rabbanan who argue with Reb Nassan hold that even if you don't have kavana to knock it off the table, you have to have more of a kavana that you should at least be planning to cut. Amar Rava behazichinhu Reb Nassan l'Rabbanan. How did Reb Nassan, who says that as long as it's hipila, even without kavana for chaticha, how can he say? How can he prove his own worth? How can he prove his own shita? The Gemara says 12 lines from the bottom. Miksi v'chatachta. That's not what the pasuk says. V'zavachta ksiv. He says, if you need kavana for one, you need kavana for the other. In other words, he's saying to the chachamim, you make a distinction without a difference. If I knock something off the table, if you need to say that the animal needs kavana for shchita, givaldik, then it needs kavana for shchita. But kavana for cutting, like, well, what does that even mean? That's a very weird distinction. And so that's what the Gemara says is the machlokes Rav Nassan and the Rabbanon, and the correlating machlokes between Rav Yochanan on the one side and Rav on the other. 8-9 lines from the bottom. Hechi dami nida shenen savatavla. What was the case where this woman fell into the ocean? Ilema da ansa chaverta v'itbala. Let's say that it's like this kiruv woman who knows that her friend is about to get married, but her friend is secular, so they go to the beach and she shoves her into the ocean so she could be tovelas. If that's the case, kavana de chaverta, kavana ma'al yosi. I don't need the woman to have kavana. I need the woman who pushed the woman in to have kavana. So let's say you have Rivka and Rachel. Rachel's not so from. So Rivka pushes Rachel, and that's a perfectly kosher tefillah. That can't be the case of Nen Savatavla. So what's the case of Nen Savatavla? And furthermore, v'od, b'truma nami yachla. Even if it were to be the case that she was shoved in, the halacha is that b'truma nami yachla, Ditznan, we have a Mishnah that seems to say that she'd be able to still eat truma. Well, how is that? Ditznan, achareshes ve'ashota ve'asuma shenichfa daita. One of these people who don't have any das or they're blind. Imeshlan pikchos metaknos. And if you have someone who's totally normal, who's taking care of them, ochlos b'truma. We see black on white that they're able to eat truma. So obviously, the case that we're dealing with of Nida Shenen Savatavla isn't talking about where Rivka pushes Rachel into the water, because not only would she be muteris to her husband under those circumstances, that's Kavana Mal Yosei. It would also be muter to eat Truma. So let's try again. Answer number 2. Amar Rav Papa Rav Nasan. According to Rav Nasan, who doesn't care about her kavana to go to the mikvah, he only cares that she needs to not fall, but rather choose to fall. Rav Nasan shenafla min gesher. She ends up pushing herself off of a bridge into the water. And the Rabbanan, who cares that she has a svara to be in the water, she yarda lehaker. She went down in order that she could be in the cold water. It was refreshing. So says the Gemara.
According to Nelson, she doesn't need Kavanah at all. So literally, she nafla when you get there. Doesn't matter how she got in there. She fell in.
I actually think this v'nafla is
What's the difference between the two of them?
well, I would have thought, and I did think that the case of Rav Nasan was not nafla, but hipila.
Then what's the difference between that and your delahak?
Because yarda lehaker is not that I fell versus I chose to fall, or
No, I mean,
but, as
jumping, falling in that.
but
She went in to cool off.
no, that's only according to the Rabbanan, who need more of a kavana. Yeah, it's the same. It's equivalent. It's equivalent to the Rabbanan saying, "I need to know that I'm cutting, not that I need to know that I'm shechting. I need to know that I'm cutting." Chaticha. So I thought I actually just I'm only realizing the language now. But Amar Rav Papa, the Reb Nasan shenafla min gesher.
No,
Why is that enough?
no Kavanah. You don't need any Kavanah. According to Nelson. Rabbi doesn't Damer Lobo in Kavanah at all, apparently, Rashi reading.
No, because if you look back at the beginning of the Mishnah, the diuk of the Gemara as the Mishnah opened on Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph was Taima Denafla Ha'ipila Kshera, and then we said that that's Reb Nasan.
She seems to say.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
The Kabbalah say Hacha Ka'amar Rav Alibe Shenafim Menagesher Shaloni Stavna Afil Lirchos. She had no kavanah at all to get in that water. Rabbi Yochanan Lomidami Tefillah L'Shchita at all the Kodarish the Chubas Shemis. This is very complicated. And therefore the Shchita is another story. But according to the Rabbanan, she went into the water to cool off. But the fact is, she intentionally placed herself in the water.
But I don't understand when we transitioned our understanding of Reb Nasan from Hipila back to Nafla, because as the Gemara opened on Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph, it was crystal clear that time of the Nafla, Hipila.
What's the difference between Hipila and went down to cool off?
Just intent, nothing in practice.
Both intent. They both wanted to get.
I don't want to be on the bridge versus I want to be in the water. Just saying, like it's. But I in my head, that's what was happening.
Would be a difference.
L'Reb Nasan Rashi. Reb Nasan de Amar lo ba'inun kavana afilu lechaticha u'dechavasahacha ka'amar Rav. Ali Bey. Rav held that she was muteris to her husband, but not muteris for truma. Shenafla min hagesher shelo niskavna afilu lirchos. But I would have expected the word a hefil word, and not
Yeah, literally, it sounds like she fell off because according to Rav.
But the language of Rashi on the first long line of Shalonis Kavna Afilu Lirchotz implies that there was a partial kavana. Okay, that's a good question. I don't know. Rabbi Yochanan lo medami tvila l'shchita. Yeah.
Question, I think. Rabbi Yochanan is totally separate.
All of this is within Rav. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I'll have to look it up.
I think that's the answer. He's
Yeah.
totally separating them.
Okay. I hear you. So let's just read Rav Papa's answer again, even though I have a small lack of clarity, but yeah, it's definitely the case in the Rabbeinu Gershom. If you have it on the side there, he certainly speaks that way. He says, Amar Rav Papa leRab Nasan shenafla min hagesher, klomar leRab Nasan telo bai kavana lechulen, afilu leshum chaticha, de afilu lo niskaven ela lenoatza shchitas akshera. Hachanami afilu lo niskavna leshum rachitza, ela shenafla min hagesher tfilasa tfila leinyan tashmish amita etzel baila de baila chulen. Oh, that was the distinction
But you don't need any-
of chulin versus kadshin. Very good. That's the answer. Oh, so clear. Yeah, so clear. All right, so that's the answer, is because we're talking about chulin matters, which was the Gemara's pushback. Where it pushed on it and said,
No requirement.
None, none.
Nafla, even against her will, would work.
Yeah, it was just nafla. Against her will would for sure
Nafla.
work. That was Rivka. That was Rivka pushing Rachel.
Unintentionally.
Unintentionally, yeah.
Their bridges were not our bridges.
Rickety planks of wood. Good.
On a good day.
On a good day. Okay, bottom line, Lamed Aleph and Beis. Let's continue. We have 13 minutes left. If while I'm shechting the paraduma, I also shecht another animal, so you're not allowed to do two things at once. You can't mix avodas with the paraduma, top of Lamed Beis Minah. What if you shechted another animal with it, not on purpose? Rashi says nishchata behema acheres below miskavin. Right, in the first case of shachat para v'shachat behema, you were bekavana. Here it was shelo bekavana. I don't know how clueless you are that you're shechting a second animal by accident, but the Gemara paints the case anyways. Nishchata behema acheres l'Reb Nasan, who says that I don't care if you have kavana. The para is psula and the behema is kshera. The para is psula because you can't interrupt the avoda of the para aduma. The other animal is fine because I don't care if you have any kavana. Doesn't matter. Because remember, that second animal is chulin. The second animal is chulin, so we don't really care. L'Rabbanan, who say we need some level of kavana. The paras kshera, because I had no kavana on the second animal, and the behemoth is psula. Says the Gemara Pshita. No. Nishchata behema acheres the Reb Nasan itzrichale. We need to discuss the case of accidentally shechting the second animal. Salkadai techamin v'shachat osa amarachmana v'lo osa v'chaverta. I might have thought that maybe what we were talking about is the Torah being overly specific when it comes to the para aduma, that we have a drasha that says v'lo osa b'chaverta, you're not allowed to do two. So I might have thought according to Reb Nasan, based on the drasha of shachat osa, that he wouldn't have said what he said, kamash malan, that he is matir the behema that you accidentally shechted. You might have thought that the din by chulin didn't apply. Now the Gemara over here then adds chatach dalas ima, if I intentionally cut a pumpkin with the paraduma, everyone agrees divrei akol psula, and nechtachad lasima by accident. Again, hard to understand the mitzias, but divrei akol kshera for, because here you don't even have the preclusion of a second animal being shechted. You're right; you shouldn't have mixed things, but everyone agrees to these bookend halachos that if it was intentional to cut the dalas with the paraduma, it's puzzle. If it was incidental, then it is divrei akol kshera. Very good. It was a good joke right there. That was some Purim Torah almost. Says the new Mishnah, Nafla Sakin Vihigbia. The knife falls. Takes me 20 seconds to pick up the knife. It's a little bit of Shahia. Nafla Kela Vihigbian. His talus falls over his arm. So whatever he's wearing, his clothing, he picks it up. Hishchiz Esa Sakin. He starts to sharpen the knife midstream because he's concerned. So you have a Shahia. The off, he gets very tired. Bachaver Shachat. So we had a Shahia. If the amount of time you waited was enough time to do another shchita psula. We don't know what these phrases mean. We're going to learn them in the Gemara. What does that mean? Quarter of the way down at the open of the Gemara. Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. What does it mean, Kedei Shchita, according to the Tanakhama, that it would be possible? Amarav, Kedei Shchita's behema acheres. If the pause is long enough to shecht another animal then you are going to have shehiyah. If the pause was less than that, you're good. Amri la Rav Kahana v'Rav Asi l'Rav K'dei shchitas behema lebehema v'of l'of Does it have to be that the pause is compared to the animal you're shechting? If I'm shechting a behema and I pause, then the measurement of Kedei Shechita is shechting another behema. And the same is true for an oaf. If I'm cutting an oaf and there's shehiyah, then the measure of shehiyah will be cutting another oaf. O Dilma, perhaps we're more makel, af behema le'of. Maybe the pause when I'm doing an oaf is the pause of a behema, which is a kula. Let's say it takes 5 seconds to shech the bird and 20 seconds to shech the behema. So if I have shehiyah, but the shehiyah is only 15 seconds, and I'm shechting a bird, afal pi that I could have shechted another bird in this time, but maybe we're makel to say that the shehiyah time slot could be even longer than the bird. It could be behema. Amar lahu lo hava bedichna be bechavivi di ishayle. So we need Rashi here. Rashi is 3 lines before the wide lines, 4 lines before the wide lines. Amar lahu lo hava bedichna bechavivi di ishayle. Lo haisa daiti gasa bedodi. I didn't feel very close to my uncle Reb Chia. I wasn't comfortable asking him. We didn't have a good vibe going. I wasn't able to ask. So let's get into the details. Says the Gemara, a third of the way down. Itmar Amarav Kadesh Chitas Behema Lebehema V'Of L'Of. He says it has to be the same animal. You're cutting an oaf. The Kadeshi is how much time it would take you to cut an oaf. You're cutting a behema. The Kadeshi Shchita would be to cut a behema. Shmuel completely argues on Rav. Shmuel Amar Afilu Behema L'Of. V'chein Asa Ravin Amar Rav Yochanan Afilu Behema L'Of. So we have Rav Yochanan and Shmuel on the same page, that they hold that if you're shechting a bird and you have shehiyah, so the pause can be even that of a behema, and it's still, as long as you're less than the pause of a behema, you're good to go. It's not considered a shehiyah that is halachically problematic. Reb Chanina, it says Chananya, it's corrected on the side here too. Reb Chanina Amar Kadesh Yavi Behema Acheres V'Yishchot. He says, what do we mean Kadesh Shchita? That you have to go get another animal to shecht it. Says the Gemara, Yavi? Afilu me'alma? You get to fly somewhere now and go get how so the Gemara says nasata devarecha l'shiurin. This is a catchphrase used by learners. Imkein nasata devarecha l'shiurin. There's no limit to your. It's so subjective. It's down the block. It's a mile away. It's 20 miles away. It's 100. So how do you determine kadesh shchita? That's ridiculous. Amar Papa. Of course, that's not what I mean, but rather it means Omedes lahatil ikabenai. It's standing right next to me. Amre b'marav mishmed Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina Kadesh Yag Biena v'Yar Bitzena v'Yishcho Daka l'Daka v'Gasa l'Gasa. He's like Rav. He says that the amount of time we're talking about of shehiyah is to pick up an animal, lay the animal back down, shecht it. But a daka for a daka and a gasa for a gasa, a sheep for a sheep, and a cow for a cow. Very good. Next in, 2/3 of the way down. Amar Rava Hashoche B'Sakin Ra. Let's say I have a bad knife. Now, this bad knife doesn't mean that it's nicked. It just means that it's not so sharp. We all have one of these knives in our drawers that we're not even sure that it can cut anything anymore. It only cuts by pressure. So here, you're not doing drasa. It's just not a very sharp knife. You can cut all day long. As long as you're not doing drasa, and as long as there's no nicks in the blade, you can cut all day. The halacha is that it would be totally kosher. Boy Rava, Shehiyos Mao Sheyitzdarfu. What if I have 10 short shehiyos? Each one 3 seconds. And let's say that shehiyah was 30 seconds. Do they add up? Says the Gemara, maybe we should look at the case that Rava just said a moment ago about hashochet b'sakin ra, that you can cut all day long. Says the Gemara, terrible argument. In the case of the knife that was dull, you never stopped cutting. You were going back and forth for 5 minutes. That's not considered similar to the case of Kadeshi Yitzdarfu. What if I waited in regards to doing miut simanim, only 10%, but I was shaha 10% after doing 10%. I just did 10%, I was paused for 2 seconds. The Gemara says take it. And then lastly, the Gemara says, Reb Shimon Omerim Shah Kadei Bikor. What does Kadei Bikor mean? Says the Gemara, Ma Kadei Bikor, Amar Rav Yochanan, Kadei Bikor Shel Chacham. The amount of time that it takes to go see a Chacham and to ask him a shayla. Says the Gemara, and this too, how far does the Chacham live? Are you going to Rabbi Reese? Are you going to Rabbi First? Are you going out of town? You're going to Detroit? Where are you going? Where are you going? So it's not fair. The Gemara says, no, the guy who is the shochet is the Chacham, and he does a shchita, he's like, hey, something didn't feel right, let me just check. That is what it means to have a hefsek of shehiyah. Next Mishnah. This Mishnah is going to discuss ikur. Says the Gemara, shachat es haveshet. Let's say I did a proper shchita on the veshet, upasak es hagargeres, and I didn't shecht, I tore the trachea. Oh, pasak es hagargeres, or I first tore the gargeres, ve'achar kach shachat es haveshet, and then I did a proper shchita. Oh, shachat echad mehen v'himtin la'ad shemesa, or I only shechted one and waited till the animal died, or oh shehechlid es hasakin tachas hasheni upasku, or I did chalada and then I tore the second of them. Rabbi Yeshovev Omer nevela, Rabbi Kiva Omer treifa. Certainly don't eat it. One holds it's nevela and it carries with it tuma. The other holds that it's a treifa, and while it's usher to eat, but there is no tuma. Says the Gemara, Klalam Rabbi Yeshovev Mishum Rabbi Yoshua Kol Shenifsala b'shchitas nevela. Anything that had a ruined shchita has a din of nevela. Kol shechitasa keroi v'davar achar garam lalipasel treifa. Very interesting halachic distinction. Nevela is generated by a bad shchita. Treifa is generated by a secondary issue that is not related to shchita. V'ho delo Rabbi Akiva. Seemingly, Rabbi Akiva agreed to the klal of Rabbi Yeshovev in the name of Rabbi Yoshua, but that's of course going to be a problem because shachat es haveshet v'chuli v'ho delo Rabbi Akiva. He agrees, or minhu Rabbi Akiva doesn't agree. What did we see? Elu treifos bebehema. The following are treifos by an animal. We're going to learn until about halfway down, and then we're going to stop if we have time. Nekuvas haveshet upsukas hagargeres. If there's a hole in the veshet, we know that by the veshet we're more machmer than we are by the kana that we've learned before. So the Gemara says that if you have a hole in the esophagus or if you tore the gargeres, then those are called treifos. That's problematic because our Mishnah said that if there's a problem with the shchita, then it's a nevela. So how can you say that that's true if you're posekas hagargeres? You ruin the shchita. You ruin the shchita. That shouldn't be called a treifa. Yet the Gemara says that the last three words on the bottom of Lamed Beis and Aleph is elu treifos bebehema. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Lo Kasha. Kan, in one case, it was sheshachatu levasof pasak. In one case, shchita was done first, and then the tearing was done second. And kan pasak ulevasof shachat. One is where the tearing took place first. So obviously, the Gemara says shachat ulevasof pasak. So then the Gemara says nifselas b'shchita. You ruin the shchita. The shchita was supposed to be 2 levels of cutting. You started out good and you ended up bad. That animal's an avela. But pasak ulevasof shachat, you never even got the shchita. Ki davar achar garam lali pasel dumya. That's similar to a case where where you ruined it out of the gates. What was your first step? Tearing one of the simanim. Guess what? That's not shchita. That animal's a treifa. That animal's a treifa. Esvei, the Gemara says, Rav Acha. Let's stop right here at Esvei, because I don't want to rush this. I don't want to make it not understandable. So Amir Hashem, tomorrow night we'll pick up on the top of Lamed Beis and Mid Beis, 5 lines down at Esvei, wishing you all a beautiful night.
You know, left one license, you could use it, don't like it.
It's not a very good idea.